Our next guest, Terry Foy, CEO of Inside Lacrosse. Terry, it's great to have you on as always. How are things as we get ready for the postseason here?
How could things be better? It's May 1st. I don't know what the weather's like in central New York, but where I am, the sun is shining. It's really warm, and the lacrosse the rubber is meeting the road. Let's use that expression to describe where we're at right now.
Yeah, it is beautiful here, just for the record. About 70 today, sun shining. Hard to be inside, if we're being honest. Wish I was on the golf course, but here we are. We're talking lacrosse, and we're excited to do that. And, let's start with the ACC tournament if we could. And, we know Syracuse and Duke are both in the NCAAs, but what is on the line for both of these teams this week? I guess let's start with Syracuse. What's on the line for Syracuse this week from a seeding perspective in your mind?
It's a hard question to answer because I have never seen the resumes of the top 8 teams, and really more like the top 6, be as different from each other as they are right now. Now, I should say that last week, that was completely the opposite. I had never seen the stratification between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and so on be as clear. And so it could very easily swing back the opposite direction as a result of the results this weekend. But if the season were to end today, what you would have is a committee deciding which variables are we going to emphasize. For instance, there are 2 teams that are in the top 5 conversation that have a loss outside of the top 20. Sometimes we've seen those bad losses really injure someone. Other years, we've seen them really emphasize the numbers. Other years, the top 5 wins, whatever the case may be. Syracuse right now, I think, is very clearly in the top 5 seed conversation. If they were to lose in the semifinals of the ACC, could they fall out of it? Potentially, but they would have to get passed by a couple of the teams behind them. And there are only a handful that can actually do it, Virginia being one of them. And so it would require some of the results to co-align in a way where they would get passed. Otherwise, A, if they win, they are very clearly a top 4 seed. And B, it's possible that they would stay at number 5 even with a loss just because the other teams that were trailing them in terms of quality resume weren't able to bolster their own resume as well over the course of the next 4 days.
All right, how do you kind of handicap this game on Friday between Syracuse and Duke? We know they played once this year. SU won the game as one of their more impressive performances of the season. How do you see the rematch going on Friday?
I want to apologize again for saying I don't know. I know that's one of the worst answers that a radio show host can hear. But let me say this. The reason I don't know is because typically the ACC tournament is a very strange thing. First of all, it has gone away. It wasn't played the last 2 years because it was a strange thing. It had been the second last week of the regular season, and then some teams didn't play the last week of the regular season. And so if you didn't make it, you had this 2-week break leading into the tournament and whatever else. It's been a quagmire for a very long time. Even in the, kind of pre-conference realignment days when it was just the 4, kind of core ACC members, Duke, Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia, it was still always viewed as like they just do it to boost their RPI and get a better seed in the NCAA tournament. Those teams don't actually want to win because they want the extra couple days rest or the extra motivation coming off of a loss in order to be better prepared and more focused heading into the NCAA tournament that actually matters. And that is kind of the question when it comes to this Duke-Syracuse matchup. If you were to tell me that Duke is not going to come out with their hair on fire because in the deepest parts of their brains and hearts, they know that they're probably better off losing in terms of the cost to their NCAA tournament resume. It might take them from a 5 to a 6. I don't know that is the determining factor in whether or not they get a good quarterfinal matchup versus the extra rest, not having to put another game on their bodies, kind of heading into the Selection Sunday and NCAA tournament where, they're potentially only going to have 6 days to prepare. So with that being said, if you were to tell me that Duke is going to come out with their hair on fire because they got embarrassed in the Carrier Dome and got limited to 4 goals, then my analysis would be completely different. I think this is going to be a game that is determined by energy, effort, and the way in which the conflicts kind of match up. We saw Billy Dwan do such a good job on Brennan O'Neill in the Carrier Dome. Does that motivate Brennan to have a great game? Or does Billy know how to guard him in a way that not a lot of other people do, and he's going to be able to limit him again? These are questions that we're not going to know the answers to until the opening whistle. And candidly, if it's a 7-7, 8-8 game in the third quarter, we might not know the answers until the end of the fourth quarter because that's kind of what you saw against Carolina in terms of Duke's performance. They came out really lackadaisical and, tried to push late in order to close. I think they went on a 6-goal run, and it wasn't enough to win the game, but it was an indication of the fact that maybe they do have something inside them that if they decide to activate it against the Orange, they're going to put themselves in a position to win down the stretch.
Yeah, and Duke, of course, you said was embarrassed inside the Dome by Syracuse. They're coming off a really bad performance, too, where they fell behind big against North Carolina in their regular season finale, and Carolina ended up winning that one. So you're right, motivation going to be a real big key on Friday. How about the other semi? Notre Dame and Virginia, two teams that just saw each other. How tough is that? How does that kind of factor into the next one when, again, they literally just played? How does that factor into this game coming up in semifinal number 1 on Friday?
Well, we have a good example of it just happening last night. So on last Friday, Colgate got up to a 10-2 lead on Boston University. The Terriers came back and won that game. I believe 13-12 was the final score. In so doing, they won the opportunity to host the rematch in the Patriot League quarterfinals, which happened last night. That game went to triple overtime. It was 18-17. It was one of the best games of the season. But Boston U won. So point being, I don't think that just because, Notre Dame won last week in Charlottesville doesn't mean that the Fighting Irish are going to be able to win in Charlotte on Friday, especially when, it's kind of similar in the sense that they came back from a second-half deficit. It wasn't nearly as severe. But the point being, if the pattern holds, maybe we're going to get another barn burner, another game of the year between the Cavaliers and the Fighting Irish. And I think that that's another element of this whole question around motivation. Virginia has had Notre Dame's number over the course of the last few seasons. And now the Fighting Irish have 2 wins in a row. Of course, last year's semifinals, which was one of the epic games of the season, won in overtime, sent the Fighting Irish to the national championship game and obviously on to a title. If you're Virginia, not only do you have a better taste in your mouth by virtue of the back-to-back losses to what is becoming a pretty bitter rival, but also you have this knowledge that you didn't play well yourself in the second half. Because if I were going to look at one reason that Virginia lost, it was their inability to clear the ball down the stretch. So not only – they're kind of like Duke in the sense that it's been almost a month since Virginia played – I shouldn't say that they played well because they played really well in the Carrier Dome or in the JMA Wireless Dome against Syracuse 2 weeks ago, but they lost. And so, that's not the standard for this program is to play well and lose. So they're going on a month since they felt good about themselves, and maybe they come out of the locker room saying, we need this in order to feel good about ourselves going forward, and Notre Dame basically has done what they've needed to do. The hay is in the barn as far as they're concerned. They are more likely than not going to be the number 1 seed regardless of the result on Friday.
Terry Foy joining us here from Inside Lacrosse. And I want to talk big picture, Terry. You look at the 4 teams that are in the ACC tournament. They're all ranked among the top 6 in the country. Hopkins number 2 right now, Denver number 4. Do all 6 of those teams, in your mind, have a legitimate shot at winning a national title? Is the list longer than that? Is the list shorter than that? Going into the NCAA tournament, how many do you think have a legitimate shot of actually winning the whole thing?
So I do think that all 6 of those teams have a legitimate shot. I have been a doubter, I guess, on Denver all year, and they have proven me wrong at every turn. So I'm done doubting them. I think Denver can win the national championship. Hopkins, similarly. I think you look at, their negative results, their losses, whatever the case may be. They lost an opening season game in incredible fashion to Denver. They lost a close 1-goal neutral site game to Syracuse. And beyond that, there isn't a lot not to like about the Blue Jays. I think ultimately what it comes down to is I think the list is actually larger than those 6 teams. And the reason is because I think all of those teams have some flaws, with the possible exception of Notre Dame. If you were to say the list of viable contenders is 1 and then 7 or 8, I would accept that. But I don't think that's how sports works. I don't think that you can take Notre Dame against the field and say, yes, that is the likely outcome. And so if you're looking at other teams that could potentially find their way into it, I would look no further than the 2 teams that played an absolutely epic quarterfinal in 2023 at Navy last year, Army and Penn State. And then obviously Penn State won that buzzer beater game that got reviewed, and the goal was released. The Army goal was released just a second too late. Penn State goes on and they take Duke to overtime, and who knows what would have happened if Blue Devils hadn't won on a call that ultimately was deemed to be the incorrect call. So I think those 2 teams deserve to be in the title conversation. And then the last one is Maryland, and they haven't looked like a team worthy of title consideration all year long. I will fully concede that. But at the same time, they're coached by John Tillman. And I just have a hard time saying goodbye to them. They have a Michael Myers vibe. And who knows? This is the time of year when all it takes is getting hot for a couple weeks, and you're sliding downhill en route to hoisting a trophy on Memorial Day.
All right, one team you did not mention there is Cornell, a team that's just about an hour south of here. Won the Ivy League. They're hosting the Ivy League tournament, 9-4 on the season. What do you make of the Big Red? And I guess what is keeping you from putting them on that list?
So what I make of them is this season is an incredible crystallization of how good Gavin Adler has been for them over the course of the last 4 years, because they're a top 5 offensive team and they're in the mid-30s defensively. Last year, they were in the mid-teens defensively, and that was why they were a bona fide title contender. I don't know that the Big Red play good enough defense in order to be able to win 4 NCAA tournament games in a row. And part of that is compounded by the fact that now you've seen this compression within the Ivy League by virtue specifically of Princeton beating Yale in one-sided fashion on Saturday, where I could see any of the 4 teams, Penn, Princeton, Yale, or Cornell, emerging victorious from that. It's likely that 2 additional teams will get into the NCAA tournament. So I see the Ivy League as a three-bid league, but all of them are going to be in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range from a seeding standpoint. They're not going to play each other in the first round, but I also think that from an odds standpoint, they're going to have tough first-round matchups. They're going to have really tough quarterfinal matchups, and that's where I see a little bit of the threshold relative to why I think any Ivy League team falls into the category of bona fide title contender the way maybe some of the other ones that we've already talked about were.
Terry, I feel like we could talk lacrosse all day, but we are running short on time. So I got one more for you. You mentioned a moment ago Notre Dame's the best team, and you could make a case for Notre Dame and then the next 7 after that. So I'm going to ask you, Notre Dame or the field to win the national title? Who are you taking?
The field. I always take the field when it comes to questions like that. Notre Dame is good. I think it's interesting whether they are better than they were last year, but at the same time, even last year's team, we already talked about it. Virginia took them to overtime. I mean, the nice edge is so razor thin in terms of the margins of why these games are won and lost that even if you are considerably better than your opponent, doesn't mean you're going to win. Especially doesn't mean you're going to win 4 games in a row in May.
Well said. We love having you on, Terry. Thanks so much for coming on. Enjoy this time of year, and hopefully we can talk again here over the course of the next month. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always available for you guys. Thanks so much.
Terry Foy, CEO of Inside Lacrosse. And with that, we'll take a timeout. Worst song bracket than today's business. What's that?
I like both these songs.
Yeah.
Today.
We will get to that next. We got Lucas Vivalli coming up at 1. Today's business coming up at 1:15. That kind of sets the table for the next half hour or so. We're back after this on ESPN Radio.